everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for December 18th, 2017. On today's show, in our feature presentation, I'm going to play for you my interview with director Rian Johnson talking about spoilers for Star Wars The Last Jedi. And in the spoiler room, I will be joined by a couple of guys from SlashFilm.com to discuss the Star Wars The Last Jedi spoilers. So if you haven't had time to geek out with your friends and talk about all the surprising revelations from this movie, we will spend some time after this interview to discuss those. But before we get to that, we're going to play this interview with Rian Johnson. I conducted this interview Friday. That's why I wasn't here on the podcast. I was busy doing Last Jedi interviews, which, by the way, thanks to the guys, Ben, Jacob, HT, Chris, everybody for putting together that episode of Slash Film Daily without me. It was the first time I got to listen to the show, not as a host, but as a listener, and it was great. But yeah, so we did these interviews on Friday on the Walt Disney lot. Before the interview, we were asked to hold the spoiler sections until January 15th, by Rian Johnson. But, later that day, he held a Q&A with Entertainment Weekly, and Entertainment Weekly, I guess, accidentally broke the embargo, so all hell broke loose, and over the weekend, everybody published their spoiler interviews. So the spoilers have been unleashed, but I'm glad that Disney has, set up a time for us to talk with Rian Johnson after seeing the film, so we could actually delve into, his choices and, what actually happens in the film and not just be talking, around marketing. So I should warn you, if you have not seen Star Wars Last Jedi, I would shut off this podcast and listen to it at a later time, because this whole podcast is going to be massive spoilers for episode 8. So if you have not seen that film, turn it off now. This is your last warning. You will be spoiled to a massive degree. Here's my interview with Rian Johnson. Can you talk about subverting Snoke. Expectations and killing Snoke?
Yeah, I guess the first thing to say is, coming into writing this or any story, the object is not to subvert expectations. The object is not surprise.
Yeah.
I think that would lead to some contrived places. The object is drama. And in this case, the object was figuring out path for each one of these characters where we challenge them and thus learn more about each of them by the end of the movie. So, that having been said, Kylo's arc in this movie I saw as, okay, I want, besides his relationship with Rey, the big arc for Kylo in this movie was breaking down this kind of unstable foundation that he's on, and then building him to where by the end of the film, he's no longer just a Vader wannabe, but he's stepped into his own as kind of a quote-unquote villain, but a complicated villain that you understand.
Yeah.
Right? So with that in mind, the idea that Kylo would get to that place by the end of it led me to think, well, then what is Snoke's place at the end? And does that work with him just kneeling before Snoke at the end? No. If Kylo's got to get to a place of actual power, the ultimate expression of that would be him, ascending beyond his master. And that also then gives the opportunity to have a great dramatic moment that you don't expect, of getting Snoke kind of out of the way. So that really is where it all stemmed from. It was thinking about Kylo's path, thinking about where I wanted him to be at the end of the movie to set him up for the next film, and thinking, okay, that means we're going to clear away this slightly more familiar dynamic of the Emperor and the pupil, clear the boards from that, and then that's much more exciting going into 9, the notion of now we just have Kylo as the one that they have to deal with. You can no longer take a rational guess at how the Snoke-Kylo thing is going to play out in the next movie.
Yeah, I have no idea.
Yeah, it's exciting.
Kylo says that line, kill the past, whatever. It seems like your movie is kind of representative of that. Like, to move on with Star Wars, to move on to the future, you kind of have to let go of...
well, it's an interesting aspect of it. It's an interesting theme. And it's, for me, the balance was... Because Kylo is saying that, and interestingly to me, Luke is kind of saying his own version of that as well. And it's really Rey who is the balance, who I think, and Rey is where my heart lies in terms of in that theme and where we end up by the end of the movie, because I do believe that, I understand the kind of that fiery instinct of burn down the past, cut off from tradition, forge forward in your life, don't look back. Every one of us has had an example in our life where we've felt that or acted that out in some way. I also think if you think you're leaving the past behind or cutting it off, you're fooling yourself. And the real way to move forward is by building on that, is by realizing what you take and what you leave from the past, not holding on to it too closely, like the lesson of Luke and the tree with Yoda, but building off of what it's worth and moving forward from there, which is what Rey lands on. And that ultimately is where my heart's at. That's, I hope, kind of also on a meta level expressed in the movie, how hopefully it still feels like a Star Wars movie and pays some things off, but also does do some things that are unexpected and takes us to new places.
Does you mentioned Rey? We get the revelation that she is from no one of significant value. Can you talk about coming to that? Is that did you enter this like that was your like?
No, that was a, like everything else in the movie, that I came to through a process of breaking the story and figuring it out. And the nice thing was I was very thankful that there was no slip of paper that was handed to me that said Rey's parents are so-and-so.
Yeah.
The fact that I had the freedom to figure it out meant that for this story I could figure out the most dramatically potent answer to that question.
But you talked to JJ about it.
I did, yeah. Yeah, he didn't. No, he didn't dictate it.
He didn't have any idea?
No. Well, I don't know. I mean, he might have had thoughts in his head of what it was going to be, but he didn't dictate them to me. He left it open, you know. So for me, the reason it lands there, I mean, first of all, I think I enjoy the notion of disconnecting, you know, the idea of tapping into this power in yourself and having I like the idea of disconnecting that from lineage. I think that feels in a anyone can be president type way. I think that's kind of nice. But the bigger thing was, you know, if you look at, for example, the Vader "I am your father" moment from Empire, I think that moment's so powerful because it's the hardest possible thing that Luke and the audience could hear at that moment. You know, it takes away the easy answers, basically. We thought he was just a bad guy that we could hate and want to kill. With that one sentence, suddenly it's more complicated than that. It's harder than that. If for Rey in this movie, if someone had told her, yes, here's the answer, you are so-and-so's daughter, here's your place in this world, here you go, that would be the easiest thing she and the audience could hear. It would hand her on a silver platter her place in all this. The hardest thing for all of us to hear, and the thing that she doesn't want to hear, and maybe we don't either, is that this is not going to be something where it's going to define you. And in fact, the fact that you don't have this is going to be used against you by Kylo to try and pull him into your orbit. This is going to be hard, and you're going to have to stand on your own 2 feet and define yourself in this story.
I have a couple, like, just questions that people I talked to that saw the film have. Quickies. Was the flower guy that Maz said was at Canto Bay, was that actually the original person? And DJ was not the person that
No, the Master Codebreaker, was originally that's the guy. And then they didn't find the guy, but they found a guy.
What is the black hole thing that Rey goes into?
Oh, you mean the cave?
Yeah, the cave.
Well, the idea that in this natural place, if this place is very potent with the Force, that the temple, and originally there was more dialogue that kind of talked about this that fell away to the wayside. The idea that if there's a Jedi temple up top, the light, it has to be balanced by a place of great darkness. Similar, obviously similar. We're drawing a very obvious connection to Luke's training and to Dagobah here, obviously. And so the idea was down, if the up top is the light, down underneath is the darkness, and she descends down into there and has to see, just like Luke did in the cave, her greatest fear. And her greatest fear is in the search for identity, that she has nobody but herself to rely on.
I like what you did with time in that sequence.
Cool.
Why didn't anybody respond when Leia called for help?
Oh, you mean out in the galaxy?
Yeah.
Well, we don't get their perspective in this movie, so we just get the perspective of the folk. But my assumption, and the assumption of the folks in the Resistance in that cave, and Leia's assumption, is that they assume that hope is lost and that the fight is that there's for whatever reason they assume that they can't win this battle and that the First Order is that hope is, the spark of hope is out, and that's the whole thing that Luke restores when he comes back, and that's what starts spreading it back out into the galaxy after he does his big act at the end, I think.
Is there any chance Phasma survived this film?
Phasma is the Kenny of these movies, so there's always a chance, but I don't know. JJ is writing the next one, and I have no idea what he's doing, so all bets are off.
Did Yoda know that Rey took the books?
Oh, of course, yeah.
So that's why he was didn't care.
Yeah. Well, and also he has a line, and if you watch it again, listen, he makes explicit reference to her.
She has everything she needs. That's why when I saw it the second time, I was like, "Oh,
sneaky little muppet."
You're good. I love that. Can you talk about getting Frank Oz back?
Oh my God, man! So he, when I realized that Yoda was going to have a place in this story, and also I realized, okay, and it's Luke and Yoda, and the Yoda that Luke has the emotional connection with is one from the original trilogy. I thought, oh, holy shit, we can do the puppet. And so Neil Scanlon, our creature supervisor, his team found the original mold. They meticulously recreated the puppet. Frank came and spent 3 weeks, not even rehearsing, but just working with the puppet engineers on getting the balance of it and getting it all perfectly right. They tracked down the woman who painted Yoda's original eyes and had her paint new eyes for him. I mean, we just, every single thing. And then Frank, we had a magical night where Frank came and puppeteered the Yoda. He's down there underneath the boards with the headset on, watching the monitor down there, doing his magic. And we shot the scene the way they would have back when they did Empire. It's pretty cool.
No, that scene was awesome.
Pretty fucking cool.
When did you decide that Luke had to die?
It was something very early on that started to feel right to me. It was something that and it was a process. It was very early, when I kind of landed on where Luke's head was at and what his arc was going to be in terms of moving from someone who's decided the galaxy is better off without Luke and the Jedi to fully embracing the galaxy needs a legend to believe in. I'm going to put this on my shoulders and be the legend of Luke Skywalker for everybody. When I knew that was his arc, I had the instant tinge of, that means that's the place for him to, because what else can he accomplish in the physical realm beyond that? That would be the place emotionally that would have the most impact for him to let himself go. And also the notion that actually sets up, and again, I don't know what's going to happen in 9 at all, but the idea that there's actually more potential for more interesting things in terms of his role in the final chapter if he moves into another realm.
He could be a Force ghost haunting Kylo.
It's fascinating, isn't it? A lot more fascinating than him just tagging along with our heroes with a lightsaber. So to me, it opened up more potential, and it seemed like, especially having a full film that is Luke's journey, it seemed like if there's any place in the trilogy where it's going to have the most potent place, it would be here. But believe me, I wasn't looking forward to doing it.
The passing of Carrie Fisher, obviously everybody's probably asking about that, and the film's dedicated to her. I want to ask creatively, was there ever thought of changing the film? Because you could have had her where Holdo is, or
sure, it could have. I had the discussion with Kathy when we came back from New Year's after she had passed and looked through the scenes. We decided, and I felt very strongly that even though it was going to be tricky in terms of how you handle in the next chapter, we have this last performance from her. I couldn't see of any way of engineering something like what you're talking about without losing
Luke.
The scene with her and Luke, or the scene with her and Rey at the end, or the scene with her and Holdo. And then we'd be manufacturing something which would be manufactured and not great. And I just felt like those scenes are such potent goodbyes to her. I felt like we all deserve to have them up on screen. And it's such a beautiful ending. The fact that she kind of gets the last word in the movie, and that last word is one of hope. We have everything we need. I want Princess Leia to tell me that right now, So decided to stick with what was there.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks.
I think you were successful in that.
No, thanks, man. I appreciate it.
And joining me to talk Last Jedi spoilers is Slash Film managing editor Jacob Hall.
Hello, hello.
And Slash Film weekend editor Brad Oman.
Hey, that's me.
Brad, you've been busy, but you got to see Last Jedi at least once, right?
Oh, not only did I see The Last Jedi once, but I made sure to see it 3 times this past weekend.
Wow, you have me beat. I've only seen it 2 times. Jacob, have you seen it more than once?
So far once. I'm going to wait till January when I can really have some time to really soak into it. I have too many things to watch for end of year stuff right now.
Yeah. And Jacob, I know you talked a little bit about spoilers on Friday's episode of Slash Film Daily, but you didn't dive deep into that. It was more of like the broad strokes of why you love the film. So let's get into it. Let's talk about some of the stuff that I talked with Rian Johnson about. So let's start with killing Snoke. Snoke was kind of set up as kind of like the new emperor by J.J. Abrams in The Force Awakens. And I think a lot of fans are kind of disappointed that he is kind of just quickly offed with almost no, celebration in The Last Jedi. I wanted to hear what do you guys think of, how Rian subverted expectations and killed off Snoke?
I think this is great. I think that Rian Johnson realized that Snoke was very much the Emperor Part 2. He was another all-powerful, mysterious guy with incredible Force powers who was manipulating a Skywalker, in this case, or a Solo, whatever you want to call Ben Solo or Kylo Ren at this point. And he realized, in line with the rest of the movie, that we can't do the same thing again. We can't keep repeating our cycle. It's time to start over new. So by taking him and building him up, throughout that movie, he's doing incredible things you've never seen done with the Force. He's like this all-powerful Force wizard, and he's killed so suddenly and so without such fanfare by a character who's so much more nuanced and so much more interesting and so much more human and so much more 2017 in a way, and that's Kylo Ren. To me, it's such a huge reflection of what makes the movie special as a whole, which is the systems, the old villains, the things you've seen before, they no longer fit in this new universe. So I was delighted by it. I cackled and when I realized that was what was happening. But I've talked about this before. I've written about this. Brad, I'm curious about your thoughts here.
No, I'm right there with you. What I love is that it's not just about subverting expectations for the sake of subverting expectations. It's for the sake of the evolution of Kylo Ren, of realizing that he doesn't need to fit into the constructs of what the Sith used to be and what the First Order has inherited from the constructs of the Empire and the dark side Force users that came before them. Kylo Ren comes to the realization that the only way that he can move forward and progress and really, become who he should be, or at least he thinks like the best way to get rid of the conflict is to be in control of his own destiny and not let anybody else control him or who he is. And so as much as it goes along with the idea of, Star Wars evolving and changing that idea, it really feels necessary for Kylo Ren as a character to continue his arc and continue this journey that he's going on, because he's still very much someone who is still conflicted about his feelings. That's why he doesn't kill Leia, and that's why he kills who was his master. He's constantly rethinking his approach to ruling and who he's supposed to be. And I think that's what makes him one of the most interesting villains that we've seen in the Star Wars universe since Darth Vader.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I hate to be the wet blanket here. I did love the movie. I'm not a whiny fanboy that is mad that, they have changed Star Wars. It's not coming from that place of fandom. It's kind of, this is the first Star Wars movie that I came out of not hugely excited to see what's next. And it's not because, I'm trying to think of how to word this. This movie was awesome. Okay, but I feel like so much that happened in this movie is stuff I was expecting to happen in like the third of this trilogy, and it doesn't leave a lot of meat on the bone to explore for the third one. I think when you kill off Snoke, you basically leave the bad guys as Kylo Ren, who is a great all-around character, conflicted. I agree with you, Brad, on all those counts. But then his, second in command is General Hux, who has been turned into a laughable buffoon in this movie. There really isn't much to the bad guys now. Phasma has been killed off, maybe, and it's just what is supposed to happen? What?
I disagree though. Like, do we really need an old white guy in a robe to make the villains interesting? I think Kylo Ren.
Oh, I don't think you need an old guy in a robe to make him interesting. But I think Kylo Ren. What is supposed to happen in the third chapter of this trilogy? Like, what is supposed to? Like,
we don't know, and that's exciting. The fact we don't know that is great.
Yeah. Isn't that so cool that you don't really have much of an idea of how this is going to go now?
It is and isn't. Like, if you had in season 2 of Breaking Bad had Walter White kill off Jesse, you could have gone on with that series, but they had this overall arc, even though that wasn't intended at first. I understand that overall arc with those characters. Like, I feel like when you make a drastic change like this, it feels like a lot of that setup that they did in Force Awakens was for nothing. It feels like kind of like I guess what I'm worried about, and we'll talk about this later, is there isn't a Kevin Feige for the Star Wars series, and that kind of worries me.
Well, Kathleen Kennedy has that role. She's the one who's making these choices, and she's the one who's saying, "Yes, this is a good idea. Let's do it." I know people like to yell at her because she is in charge of the biggest franchise in the world, and people on all spectrums find things to yell at her about. But I think that if anybody out there who I trust to safeguard Star Wars and realize what choices are right, I put my faith in her.
While I do agree with what Jacob is saying in spirit, I'm not necessarily sure that Kathleen Kennedy has the same reverence and knowledge of the Star Wars universe at large in the same way that Kevin Feige does the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the Marvel Comics universe.
Well, I'm not even talking about in that respect. I'm talking about the fact that, Kevin seems to have a game plan of where they're going, and from what I know, and I know this to be 100% true, I can't tell you how. From what I know, every filmmaker that comes on to do the Skywalker series is basically told, do whatever you want. There's guidelines of how, stuff works. The Lucasfilm Story Group will help you with, what the Force can do and what it can't do. Kathleen Kennedy is obviously involved in where she wants the direction after they come up with the script, as we've seen with Colin Trevorrow's version. But I was told by, Rian Johnson and a bevy of other people that he was given kind of whatever he wanted to do. Even Rey's parents, he could have gone in any direction he wanted to go. He wasn't handed something from JJ saying it has to be this.
That's even better then. That's great. I love that they trust a filmmaker to make that decision. I mean, I would much rather have 3 Star Wars movies, three in a trilogy, that maybe don't cohere as evenly as as a TV show would, but represent 3 very specific, unique visions. And we won't get that because Abrams is returning, and presumably the third one will be a little more in line with Force Awakens. But I love that. If you go back and look at the original Star Wars, George Lucas of the 70s is not that Lucas made the prequels. He's a very specific artist with very specific things on his mind. That's a movie very much about what interests him. Yeah. And The Last Jedi is a movie about what interests Rian Johnson. I'd rather have films about things that interest these filmmakers. I mean,
I'm not arguing against. I feel like this is the problem with this whole. Anybody that has a criticism about Last Jedi, and I know a lot of them are idiots, so it's easy to gang up on them. But it's easy to paint them as you don't want filmmakers to have their original. And no, I didn't say that. I said I just wish there was some kind of broad strokes. Do you know what I mean? Like 4 lines of this is what we want to happen in this movie. This is what. Do you know what I mean? This to me, the thing that worries me is this is in the context of a TV show, this is an amazing episode of television. This is episode 9 of Game of Thrones every year? That's what this was. But it's also as if Game of Thrones didn't have a showrunner and they hired, the next guy to do his own episode, and he can do whatever he wants with it. And that kind of worries me.
I guess what we continue TV comparison. I want to hear Brad's thoughts on this because he's been quiet. I've been yelling a lot. Breaking Bad, when they wrote the first scene of the final season, they did not know the ending. They if you go read interviews with the writers, it's holy crap, how do we get here? I have no idea. Let's figure it out in the moment. That's why I have a hard time.
But they knew at the beginning of that season where they wanted to go. Like
they didn't. I just read a book about this. Alan Sepinwall's new book on Breaking Bad covers this. They wrote all these scenes and had no idea, and they figured out as they went. And that's kind of the magic of this kind of storytelling is, let's do something bold and jump out into the water, so to speak, and see where we swim.
Yeah, and this might not be the best comparison, since the finale ended up being not as satisfying as everyone hoped. But a show like Lost, they didn't have everything figured out either, and they just figured out.
That is the best example of what I'm trying to say.
No, I know, and I get what you're saying, but I think in this case, just because
and I want to be clear, I don't want everything planned out. I just wish know.
I get what you're saying, but I think that when we're dealing with a trilogy of films, that's not exactly the same as a 6-season TV series that has 20 odd episodes every season. This is a much tighter story. Yeah. There's still an idea of what Star Wars should be, even though Rian Johnson has effectively subverted some of those expectations and changed the game a little bit, but we still there's still the idea of where these characters are on their journey, and that there's still conflict between them. The rebellion has been sparked again, and so it's not as if we're a babe in the woods, lost and wandering, looking for help. There's still some structure here, an idea of where we can take these characters. Okay. And if anything, I think this movie has helped define those characters in a much more compelling way that will make episode 9 that much more engaging and interesting.
Okay, let's move on from this, because we have a lot to talk about. This is just one of the things. And by the way, I want to say I did love how they killed off Snoke. It's just kind of
well, it doesn't sound like it, Peter.
In the moment in the film works greatly. I'm just not sure, and I know it's too early to tell. It just feels like they're kind of cutting the ends and leaving dead ends of stuff that should have been leading into that final trilogy or final film. But let's talk a little bit about Rey's parents. Okay, this is something we thought was probably going to come in this film, right? That we would finally find out who was Rey's parents. In this film, we find out her parents of at least Kylo Ren tells her, and that's a unreliable narrator, but we take it as a fact. It is that her parents are of no significant value. It's not Luke Skywalker. It's not Carrie Fisher. It's not Han Solo. It's just some random people in the Star Wars galaxy. Brad, what do you think about that?
Again, this is something that I was so satisfied to see come to fruition. It was one of the ideas that was out there, and it has such important ramifications for the Star Wars universe, because it respectfully, in a way, it does away with the idea of midichlorians and people being destined to become Jedi and being strong in the Force. And in this case, there's no importance of bloodline. There's no simply just having it passed down to you. It's anybody can be strong in the Force if they, just reach out to it and, dig deep within themselves. And Rey coming from nothing and becoming this person who rivals, the character who Luke saw such, strong power in, is something that is incredibly exciting. And Rian Johnson does a great job of showing, how important a character like that is, not just in inspiring the rebellion in the movie, but also just audiences in general. This gives such hope for people who maybe don't feel like, they come from, a family that has, given them a path to follow, and, people who, come from families with little means and things like this. It's the whole idea of inspiring hope and giving people something to strive for it's just such a wonderful message for me.
I mean, I agree with you that, I love the idea that, midichlorians don't count, that there isn't like a chosen one per se, that like, you know, anybody that can, you know, will the force, you know, anybody good that, you know, is able to, you know, harness the force can harness the force. You know, they've always said that the force is around all of us. I love all those ideas. I love what this like kind of says for this generation, a generation that, you know, had a president that was from a single mother in Hawaii, that like, you know, anybody could do that. It's a good message for today. I think, and again, I'm going to be more of a wet blank. I think the thing I didn't like is I didn't like that it was used in the context of this kind of like Kylo trying to turn her. Like, I wish we had some time to actually explore the idea of like what Rey is thinking when she learns that information, to explore like how she feels about that, and even the idea of like, you know, you don't have to come from special means to be special, if that makes sense.
I get what you're saying, but I think that Rey, I mean, like Kylo says in the movie, she already knew this. She just hadn't accepted it yet, and we understand that because when she's in that cave that's under the Jedi Temple, she's the only one standing in her way. It's her past and her identity that she hasn't figured out yet, because she won't let go of trying to figure out who her parents are. She's the only obstacle in her way from moving forward and living up to this person that she can be, you know, the strong force user and this hero. And so I think that we get all the time that we need for her to accept it. And she's still, you know, broken about it to finally come to that realization. And so I think that moment is perfectly executed, because of course Kylo would want to exploit her at the time she's feeling the most vulnerable and the most lost.
I just wish that we had some time as in the film to actually explore the idea of a hero that comes from nowhere. Do you know what I mean? Like her acceptance of that fact. Jacob, do you have any thoughts on this?
I think Brad's echoed mine, but I do think this is a case where retroactively Last Jedi makes The Force Awakens more interesting, because knowing that Rey comes from nowhere and doesn't have Skywalker blood in her makes her scenes of her surviving on Jakku all the more thrilling and interesting, because it's no longer a case of, oh, who is this powerful lady? It's, oh, this lady's great. This lady takes care of herself. And I think it's a really good choice. And Brad say what I had to say, so that's it for me.
Okay. Let's move on to Frank Oz reprising his role as Yoda. Well, it was kind of a great surprise in this film. I love that it was puppet Yoda. I love that it was, Frank Oz puppeting him opposite Mark Hamill. Do you guys have any thoughts on that scene?
It's really good. I think that I love how Yoda and Luke have essentially come to the same realization, which is that the old ways need to end, whereas Luke's reached it through this sort of frustration, anger, and resentment, whereas Yoda is cackling and laughing and like being the old jokester we knew on Dagobah. And I'll say I love. Oh, and
I love that it's that attitude from Empire Strikes Back and not the prequels. That it's the
I'm so tired of warrior general commander military Yoda from the prequels. That bores me to death. I've been living on 30 years in the swamp, and I am crazy Yoda, the one who's sort of, I feel like the Yoda who we meet in Empire, who's had time all alone to think long and hard about where he's been and what has happened, and has reached this sort of hippie phase of his life where he's a little silly and funny, and he's cackling and is being a prankster, but at the same time he's reached a grand understanding. Is so much more interesting than prequel Yoda.
See, I think they tried to do some of that with Luke in this film. Like, obviously when she hands him the lightsaber, he like throws it nonchalantly over his shoulder, and her being hit with the leaf. Do you feel the Force thing? It feels kind of like Yoda.
I love that scene.
See, I love that scene. For some reason, I don't like the lightsaber. The lightsaber feels like, it was such an important moment for her to give that lightsaber to him, and he must have so many memories about that. It seems like such a nonchalant, kind of jokey moment to have there. But
see, I don't know. People have laughed every time I've seen the movie when he throws a lightsaber. And sure, it's funny because it's not what you expect. And usually in situations like that, people laugh when they don't know how else to react. But that's just all that shows is that Luke is completely checked out. He has zero fucks to give about why she's there and why she has his lightsaber. He's not getting back into this battle, no matter who she is. and what she's brought with him. And so in that moment, I mean, I think that's great. The fact that he just throws it off and he's just like, nope, don't care.
Okay, let's talk about Luke Skywalker and.
Hold on. I want to talk about Yoda really quick.
Okay, go ahead.
I as much as I love all of the stuff with Yoda and what he does and what the final lesson he teaches Luke about failure, which I think is has phenomenal ties to George Lucas and the idea of the new filmmakers behind Star Wars learning from the failures that he made in the prequels. I think there's so many layers there regarding that. The one thing that I didn't like about it is, for whatever reason, for the first minute or so, or the first couple of shots that we see Yoda, he looks really weird. Like, at first I thought he was a CGI creation, and for some reason he has this like darker shade of blue about him, but then as the scene progresses, he becomes a little bit lighter, and you can really see that they brought the puppet back.
I did not notice this. I've seen it twice.
Yeah, in every single time, the first couple of shots of Yoda, there's something about him that looks off to me, and at first I thought it was just because he was digital, but now that we know that it's actually a puppet effect, I don't know what it is or why that is. I don't know if it's like a weird lighting thing or what, but there's something about him that felt off to me for the first couple of shots. But then he looks perfect for the rest of the scene, especially once he lights the temple on fire and everything. So I don't know, but yeah, I love the whole bringing back Yoda. I was there were 3 times in this movie where I had tears brought to my eyes, and Yoda coming back was one of them.
Yeah. Let's move on to Luke Skywalker and his untimely death. This is another thing that like a lot of fanboys are upset over. I'm kind of bummed out that he has died. I'm okay with it. I wish we would have a Skywalker in this final movie. It seems like they were teeing up, a confrontation between Kylo and Leia, and we'll never get that now. I am kind of disappointed in the way that Luke dies. Like, the way he kind of like becomes exhausted and just like disappears. Every time the 2 times I've seen the film, a lot of people around me almost have like I want to say surprised, almost like they were confused reaction to it. Like, they aren't even understanding what's happening. Like, did he die? What's going on? Do you know what I mean? It just felt like a weird way to go out, because maybe it's because we haven't established rules of astral projection, and we don't know that that's a thing that will exhaust you to death. And obviously he's leaving this existence after he has done what he needs to do and said what he needs to say. But Brad, what about you?
No, again, I'm so satisfied with Luke Skywalker's arc in this movie, and the sheer like joy that I felt when you realize that he's projecting himself through the Force to Kylo and messing with him, and becoming the legend that is Luke Skywalker, and giving hope to everybody who needs it during this time.
By the way, who out of like the 20 people that were at that battle like spread the word of that battle so that those kids in that Canto Bight could be retelling that story? Like,
they sent a message to their allies in the Outer Rim, so pretty sure it's not hard.
I don't know. It's a little whatever. It's not that big of a deal. But Jacob, what are your thoughts on Luke's death?
I think Brad was still in the middle of a thought there. I want to hear what he was saying.
Oh yeah, no, I think that it's kind of the perfect send off for Luke, because his arc is complete. He's fulfilled. He's become the legend that he didn't think that he could be, and he's become the legend that everyone thought that he was. By challenging Kylo and giving people hope, and I just love, and he gets moments with every single character that we wanted him to have moments with. He gets to talk to R2.
That moment made me cry.
Even the little wink that he gives to 3PO is great. And the last line that he has to Kylo is just great. It's on that level of cocky older Jedi Master Yoda in a way, where he's just like, see you around, kid. And I loved it. I was so satisfied with that arc, because I was not expecting them to kill off Luke. And while it is kind of a bummer that we're now out of classic characters who will be in Episode 9, I wasn't upset that we lost Luke, because I think that he'll still be around in some capacity as a Force ghost, and B, that it's just one hell of a send off for him.
Jacob, your thoughts on Luke's departure from this franchise?
I love how Luke force projects himself to have a haircut and a nicer beard and to be dressed nicer. That really, I love how. Oh crap! I gotta go meet my sister for the first time in years.
And he has his lightsaber that is now gone.
Yeah, but I like how Luke projects himself to be the idealized version of himself. I think he projects himself to be the version of himself that Rey wanted to see when she first arrived on that island, and it's him embracing the fact that, yeah, I'm no longer of use, but the memories of me are. So let me gift something. Let me gift the one final Luke Skywalker tall tale to the galaxy to help these kids fight the fight that I can no longer fight. And it's also great because Luke Skywalker manages to do all of this without actually lifting a weapon. He remains a pacifist in this movie. The most violent thing he does is kill a fish so he can eat it. He is like this model of like Jedi pacifist resistance that I found really moving in a way. I'm not saying that the resistance is going to win by not killing a bunch of First Order stormtroopers because they need to. Yeah. But I also do think the idea of Luke Skywalker winning a fight without actually being there is really powerful and a good and a really good lesson for activism. Like, you know, how do you support your cause under any and all circumstances? I think it's if you want, I can talk about this and ramble for too long, but
see, and I love the idea of that, and I love the scene in the movie. I just wish there was some way to like explore that in the movie further than, I don't know. It seems like there's a lot of interpretations of what's going on, and obviously, you know, that is what happened. But do you think a kid seeing that is going to realize, oh, Luke won the day without any violence? Like, is that what they're going to take away from that scene?
Not necessarily, but I do think a kid's going to hear about Luke facing down a First Order army and say, "Wow, that's great. How can I be that?" And I guess during what you asked earlier, like I'm just imagining, you know, First Order stormtroopers on bars and planets talking about, I saw Luke Skywalker. He absorbed 1,000 blaster hits. He's alive. Like imagine the few remaining Resistance people, like just sharing their tales as they travel from planet to planet. I mean, when we see that kid, like, looking out to the stars, we don't know how long it's been. It could have been 6 months. I like the idea that what we don't see is heroes and villains are, like, whispering, oh, my God, Luke Skywalker, did you see that? Yeah. Did you hear about that? That's, oh, my God, what's next? Are there more Jedi? What's going to happen next? I love how...
And I want to say I was being a little bit facetious with the how did the kid know that story. That's not something that bothers me. I was just a joke. But. Yeah,
but I also felt like I was thinking about that myself, but in the opposite direction. So I wanted to make sure I get that out there because I love the idea of one final stand against an army being talked about enough that some random kid has heard about it. That to me is it's just a cool image to think about.
Okay, so we were originally going to talk about what do we want to see in episode 9. But I think we're running out of time. Should we do it now, or should we hold it for later?
How about we each do one thing we want to see, and then we can do a full feature about it later.
Okay. One thing I want to see, and I mentioned this in the interview with Rian Johnson, so you probably already heard it, is I want to see Luke Skywalker. You know, he says in those last moments against Kylo, see you around, kid. I want to see him return as a Force